The wedding was supposed to be beautiful. I'd spent 3 months helping my cousin plan every detail: the ivory roses that cascaded from ceiling to floor, the string quartet tucked into the corner of the Renaissance ballroom, the champagne tower that would sparkle under the chandelier lights. I wore a soft blush gown that whispered when I moved, and for once, I felt like I belonged in a room full of people who didn't quite know what to do with someone like me. That's when I saw him. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted against the city lights sprawling below. Even from across the room, there was something about him that made the air feel different, not threatening exactly, just inevitable. Like gravity. Like a story that had already been written, and I was only now reading the first page. I shouldn't have stared. I definitely shouldn't have let him catch me staring, but he did. His dark eyes found mine across the ballroom, and for a moment, everything else, the music, the laughter, the clinking glasses dissolved into white noise. He was tall, built like someone who'd been carved from stone and consequence. His suit was black, perfectly tailored. His face was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. Then someone touched my elbow and I looked away. It was Marcus. He worked in my father's law firm, and he'd been angling to dance with me all evening. He was nice. Safe. The kind of man mothers approved of and daughters forgot about within a week. "You look incredible tonight," Marcus said, already extending his hand for the next dance. I took it because refusing would have been unkind, and I'd been raised to be kind above almost everything else. We moved to the dance floor, and I tried to focus on the steps, on his carefully constructed conversation about interest rates and vacation homes. I tried not to feel like I was being watched, but I was. That invisible weight of attention didn't lift. It pressed against the back of my neck, between my shoulder blades, into the small of my back. My skin prickled with awareness. When I finally turned my head slightly, I found him watching me still. And this time, his expression had changed. His jaw was tight. His eyes had narrowed into something darker, something that looked almost like rage. He was staring at Marcus's hand on my waist like he wanted to break it. My heart did something strange in my chest, a flip, a hesitation, a warning bell I didn't know how to interpret. Marcus didn't notice. He was too busy telling me about his family's summer house in the Hamptons. When the song ended, I extracted myself as gently as possible and moved toward the bathroom, needing a moment to breathe, to remember my own name, to understand why I felt like I'd just stepped over an invisible threshold I hadn't even seen. The bathroom was blessedly empty. I gripped the marble sink and looked at my reflection-flushed cheeks, uncertain eyes, hair still perfect. Normal. Everything was normal. I was checking my lipstick when the door opened. I expected a woman. Maybe my cousin looking for me. Maybe another guest from my father's firm. It wasn't. He stepped into the women's bathroom like he owned it, like propriety was something that happened to other people. The door swung shut behind him with a soft, definitive click. My breath caught. "You know he's not worth your time," he said. His voice was exactly what I expected. Low, rough, carrying the kind of authority that made people listen. He had an accent I couldn't quite place. European, maybe, or just the accent of someone who'd lived in dangerous places. "This is the women's bathroom," I said, which was a stupid thing to say, but the only thing my panicked brain could produce. "I'm aware." He stepped closer, and I forced myself not to retreat. "What's your name?" "I don't." I started, but he lifted one hand, and the gesture was so commanding that I actually stopped talking mid-sentence. "I'm not asking for a reason that matters," he said. "I'm asking because I want to know it. What's your name?" There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't really a question. It was a demand wrapped in the courtesy of a question mark, and despite every instinct screaming that this was dangerous, despite the rational part of my brain insisting I should leave, should scream, should do something other than stand there trembling like a small animal before a predator, I answered him. "Eva," I whispered. "Eva Rossi. Dante," he said, and it sounded like a name he'd chosen specifically for me, like he was offering it as some kind of bargain. "And you're going to stay away from the lawyer." "I don't. He's forgettable. Interchangeable. He'll bore you in a week and marry someone like you on purpose, thinking that's what a good man does. Dante stepped closer, and now I could smell him, something dark and expensive, like smoke and sandalwood. You're not a reward to be earned by someone who knows nothing about you. My throat was dry. Who are you? Someone who understands value, he said simply. And you have too much of it to waste on a man like that. I barely know you, I managed. No, he agreed. But you'll remember this moment, and you'll wonder what it meant, and that wondering will drive you absolutely mad. He was right. Even then, I knew he was right. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his knuckles brushing my cheek in a gesture so tender it felt violent. My entire body responded to that small touch, like he'd lit something inside me on fire. Go back to the party, he said softly. Dance with your cousin if you want. Smile for your father, but don't dance with the lawyer again. Then he was gone, slipping out of the bathroom like smoke, leaving me standing at the mirror with my reflection looking back at me like a stranger. I didn't see him for the rest of the evening, but I felt his absence the way you feel a missing tooth, a space where something should be, an ache you can't quite touch. And when I finally went home that night, I lay awake in the dark, wondering who the man named Dante really was, and why he'd stepped into a women's bathroom like the world's rules didn't apply to him, and what it meant that he'd touched my face like he had a right to. I didn't know yet that he did. I didn't see him at the wedding again, and I told myself I wasn't looking. But 3 days later, when I was having lunch with my closest friend Simone at our favorite cafe in the city's historic district, he was there, sitting 2 tables away, reading a newspaper like he was any normal man conducting a normal day. Except nothing about him was normal, and his eyes kept finding me over the edge of the paper. Eva, you're not listening to me, Simone said, poking my arm with her fork. I am, I lied. You absolutely are not. You've been staring out that window for 5 minutes. What's wrong with you? She followed my gaze and then looked back at me with curiosity. Wait, is it that man? The one who keeps looking at you? I don't know what you're talking about, I said, which was cowardly and transparent. You're a terrible liar. Simone grinned. He's gorgeous, though. Very dangerous looking. Like a Renaissance painting of a saint who committed actual sins. I forced myself to keep eating my salad, to pretend I didn't notice when he folded his newspaper and stood. Didn't notice when he left. Didn't notice the scrap of paper he'd slipped under his plate that I was certain had been positioned so I could see it. Can we go? I asked suddenly. We just got our food, please? Simone was a true friend because she didn't argue. She just flagged down the waiter and gathered her things. But as we were leaving, I drifted slightly, just enough to reach the table he'd occupied. The paper was gone, but the scrap of paper remained. I palmed it without looking at it, shoving it into my coat pocket like it was contraband. I didn't read it until I was alone in my apartment that night. The address was written in dark ink. The handwriting precise. A hotel in the financial district, room 1847, tonight at 8. No signature. No explanation. Just a certainty that I would know who it was from and that I would come. I didn't go. I spent an hour arguing with myself about why, cataloging rational reasons. He was a stranger. It was dangerous. It was inappropriate. My father would have a stroke if he knew I was even considering it. I stayed home. I made tea. I tried to read a book. At 7:15 p.m. I was in a taxi heading downtown. The hotel was the kind of place that asked no questions. The lobby was all black marble and floor-to-ceiling windows, with a security team that moved like shadows through the space. No one stopped me as I crossed to the elevator. No one questioned me as I pressed the button for the 18th floor. I was shaking when I reached room 1847. I almost didn't knock, but then the door opened before my hand made contact, like he'd been waiting right there, watching through the peephole. He was dressed more casually, now dark jeans, a black sweater that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. His dark hair was slightly damp, like he'd just showered. You came, he said, and it wasn't a question. I shouldn't have, I whispered. No, he agreed, but you did. He stepped back and I understood that I could leave if I wanted to. The choice was mine. Except it wasn't, because the pull toward him was stronger than my common sense, stronger than fear, stronger than every piece of rational thinking my brain was screaming at me. I stepped inside. The suite was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sleeping city, light scattered below like lost stars. There was a living area with a leather couch, a kitchenette, a bedroom beyond partially visible through an open door. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the couch. I sat. My hands found each other in my lap, fingers twisting together. He moved to the kitchenette and poured 2 glasses of red wine, bringing them to the small table in front of the couch. He set one down for me, but didn't sit. He stood instead, a few feet away, giving me space like I was something wild that might bolt. "Drink," he said. I shook my head. "I need to know who you are, really who you are." "Would it change anything?" he asked. "Yes." "No, it wouldn't," he said, and there was something almost sad in his voice. "But I'll tell you anyway. My name is Dante Moretti. I run a family business, import and export primarily. I have interests in logistics, real estate, hospitality." He paused. "And enforcement." The way he said it so casually, like he was telling me about his job at an accounting firm, made my blood feel cold. "You're a criminal," I said flatly. "I'm a businessman," he corrected. "Some of my business happens to exist outside the law, yes. Most successful men in my position do. Most successful men in my experience don't threaten women about who they can dance with," I shot back, and some small spark of courage that I didn't know I possessed flickered to life in my chest. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I didn't threaten you," I suggested. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." He turned away and looked out at the city. "I could have threatened you. I could have hurt the lawyer, made sure he never approached another woman again. Instead, I suggested you make a choice. You made the right one." "I didn't choose you," I said. "I don't even know you." "You chose not to dance with him again," Dante said, still facing the window. "After I spoke to you in the bathroom, you didn't dance with him. You went to the powder room for 20 minutes, and then spent the rest of the evening with your cousin and her husband. I know because I was watching." A chill ran down my spine. That's not normal. That's stalking." "It is," he agreed without shame. "I've been having you watched since the day I saw you at your father's office 6 months ago. I know where you eat lunch. I know which library you visit on Tuesday afternoons. I know you volunteer at a shelter on Sundays and that you donate your own money despite your father being wealthy enough to fund the entire thing." I stood up, suddenly needing distance, needing air. "This is insane. I'm leaving. Eva." My name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a possession at once. "Sit down." I didn't sit, but I didn't leave either. I stood frozen, caught between 2 impossible choices. "I'm not a good man," he continued, still facing the window. "I've never pretended to be. I've killed people. I've ordered people killed. I've destroyed lives and families. I've taken what didn't belong to me and held it until it did." He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were so dark, they looked like the sky before a storm. "But I don't lie, and I'm telling you the truth now. I saw you, and something in me recognized something in you. Not innocence. I'm not drawn to innocence. I'm drawn to the fact that you have a capacity for something you haven't let yourself feel yet. A capacity for depth, for darkness, for things that polite society would tell you to be afraid of." "You're describing danger," I said. "I'm describing myself," he corrected. "And yes, I am danger. But I'm also the only man I know who would burn the world down to protect you." I know that sounds like a threat. It's meant to be the opposite. I picked up the wine glass with shaking hands and drank it like it was water. The alcohol burned, but it also steadied something in me, made things slightly sharper and slightly blurrier all at once. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know what you're choosing," he said. "And because I'm going to ask you to choose me. Not tonight, not yet, but soon. And when you do, I want you to know exactly what you're choosing." "I don't accept your premise," I said carefully. I'm not choosing anything, I'm leaving. I moved toward the door. Eva. I stopped. You're always going to remember tonight, Dante said quietly. You're going to lie awake wondering what would have happened if you'd stayed longer. You're going to see me in crowds and feel that pull, and eventually the wondering will be too much and you'll come back. No, I won't, I said. But even I didn't believe it. I left before he could respond, my legs carrying me to the elevator, through the lobby into a taxi that I didn't remember calling. The wine made everything soft at the edges. My apartment seemed very small and very empty when I returned to it. I lay in bed that night and didn't sleep, running his words over and over in my mind like prayer beads. I was terrified. I was exhilarated. I was absolutely certain that he'd been right. I would go back. 2 weeks passed. I tried to convince myself it was over, that the man named Dante had been a strange aberration, a moment of insanity that had passed like a fever. I went back to my routine. I had lunch with Simone. I helped my father with his law practice, reviewing contracts and precedents. I volunteered at the shelter, reading to children who knew too much about fear already. But everywhere I went, I was aware of being watched, not in a way that was visible. There was no man in a dark coat following me, no obvious surveillance. It was subtler than that, a text that arrived on my phone with just an address and a time. A book I'd mentioned wanting to read appearing on my apartment doorstep. A reserved parking spot at the shelter with my name on it. Not my car's name, my name that hadn't been there before. Each gesture was a thread pulling me closer. I knew I should have been more frightened. By all rational standards, I should have called the police. Instead, I found myself waiting for the next message, the next sign that I was still on his mind. On the 15th day, my father called me into his office. "There's a client I want you to meet," he said, not looking at me, which was strange because he always looked at me. We were close, my father and I. Close enough that his discomfort was immediately apparent. "Who?" I asked. "Dante Moretti. He needs representation for some business matters. I'm assigning you to the case." My heart stopped. "Dad, he specifically requested you," my father continued, finally looking at me. "I don't like that, Eva. I don't like the implications of it, but I also don't like the alternative, which is telling him no, and telling this man no seems like a poor business decision." "What do you know about him?" I asked carefully. "Enough to understand that I prefer him as a client rather than an adversary," my father said. "He's legitimately wealthy, which means there are legitimate reasons to work with him. There are also other reasons, the kind we don't discuss. But you're smart and you're careful, and I trust you to maintain professional boundaries." Professional boundaries. As if such a thing was possible with a man who'd been having me watched, who'd stalked me through a city of millions, who'd told me he'd kill for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Okay," I said. "Good." My father smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He's waiting in the conference room. Dante stood when I entered, and I was struck again by how he dominated space simply by existing in it. He wore a charcoal suit today, his dark hair perfectly styled. He looked like a successful businessman. If I didn't know better, I would never have guessed what he actually was. "Ms. May." "Rossi," he said formally, extending a hand. "Thank you for taking my case." I shook his hand briefly, acutely aware that my father might be watching from his office. "What exactly is it that you need?" "Protection," Dante said, releasing my hand. "My business requires discretion. There are certain aspects of my operations that could be misunderstood by regulatory bodies. I need someone intelligent enough to structure things correctly, cautious enough to maintain security, and trustworthy enough to keep what they learn confidential." "That's a lot of qualities to find in a lawyer," I said. "I'm asking for them in you," he replied. We worked for the next hour at the conference room table, him explaining the structure of his business in enough detail that I could see how he'd built an empire that existed in the spaces between legal and criminal. He was brilliant about it. Every move was calculated, every connection protected. He built a network so complex and so carefully documented that unless someone could prove intent, which would be nearly impossible given the way he'd structured everything, there was nothing that could touch him. It was stunning, actually. Terrible and stunning. You're good at this, I said finally. I'm good at many things, he replied. The question is whether you are. Meaning I need to know if you can keep a secret from your father, Dante said, his dark eyes fixed on mine, because there's information in these files that, if revealed, would destroy your father professionally and personally. I need to know you have the capacity to sit across from him at dinner and not let him see that you know what you know. That's not a legal question, I said. That's a moral one. Yes, Dante agreed. So? I closed the file in front of me carefully. I can do it. I know you can, he said. That's why I chose you. He leaned forward slightly and his voice dropped so low that I had to strain to hear him. There's something I want to show you, he continued. Not today. Soon. Something that will help you understand who I am beyond what I've told you. Will you let me do that? That depends, I said. Is it dangerous? Possibly, he admitted. Most worthwhile things are. I should have said no. A smart woman would have said no, but I'd stopped being a smart woman the moment he walked into that wedding and stared at me like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. Okay, I whispered. 3 days later, he picked me up at a park near my apartment. The car was sleek and black, the interior plush with leather that smelled like nothing except money and discretion. We drove for an hour, leaving the city, climbing into hills where the houses got larger and the people got fewer. We arrived at a mansion that seemed carved from stone and shadow. This is mine, Dante said simply. He took me through the gates, past security that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. The house was enormous, but it wasn't cold. Despite the dark walls and the contemporary art that depicted violence and beauty in equal measure, there was something intimate about it. He led me to a room on the 3rd floor, a library that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of books, not the kinds that decorated spaces, but books that had been read, marginalia scrawled in the corners, passages highlighted and dog-eared. You read, I said stupidly. I'm a man of many contradictions, Dante replied. He moved to one particular shelf and withdrew a slim volume, aged leather binding. This was my mother's favorite. She was a professor of literature before my father decided she should be a wife instead. She read this book to me when I was a boy, before things became complicated. He handed me the book, and I looked at the title, a classic work of Russian literature, pages worn from handling. After she died, I stopped reading for a long time, he continued, his voice steady but something moving beneath it like a dark current. I became only the thing people feared. I became the Mafia Boss, the criminal, the predator. It made things simpler. What changed? I asked. You, he said simply, watching you at the library, seeing which books you chose, which ones you read multiple times. It made me remember that I wasn't always only one thing, that there was a time when I wanted to be more than that. I couldn't look at him. I was afraid of what I might do if I did. I'm not going to be a better man because of you, Eva, he said. And I heard him move closer. I'm still going to do things that will horrify you. I'm still going to be dangerous and ruthless and unforgiving. But you've reminded me that there's room inside me for something else. Something that isn't just hunger and control. Why tell me this? I asked. Because I need you to understand what you're choosing, he said. Not the fantasy version. The real one. A man who reads Russian literature and orders executions. A man who can make you safe and make you afraid at the exact same time. I finally looked at him, and in the afternoon light streaming through the library windows, I could see both versions of him at once. The man he'd been, the man he'd become, the man he was trying not to be, for someone he barely knew. I should go home, I said. I know, Dante replied. But he didn't move, and I didn't move, and we stood in that library among thousands of forgotten stories, while something began to shift between us. Something that felt like surrender, though I couldn't say on whose part. Working for Dante became a strange double life. By day, I was Ava Rossi, my father's assistant, dressed in neat blazers and professional heels, speaking in careful tones about contracts and legal strategy. By night, I reviewed files that detailed a criminal empire so vast and intricate that it took my breath away. I learned the names of his rivals, the structure of his family business, the precarious balance he maintained between profit and brutality. I also learned that his power was far more extensive than I'd imagined. He had judges in his pocket, police captains who reported to him before they reported to their superiors, city officials who owed him favors that would take lifetimes to repay. He moved through the world like a ghost, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for him, and devastating to anyone who did. The knowledge terrified me. It also drew me closer to him. We began meeting in his office, a private space on the top floor of a building in the financial district that required 7 separate security clearances to reach. The first time he kissed me was there, between reviewing documents about shell corporations and money laundering schemes that should have made my skin crawl. He didn't ask permission. He simply pulled me to my feet, his hand at the back of my neck, and bent his head to mine. The kiss was gentle and devastating at once. I made a small sound of surprise, and he took that as acceptance, pulling me closer, tasting me like I was something he'd been starving for. My hands ended up against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark and hungry. "I wanted to do that the first time I saw you," he said. "You were with Marcus then?" I managed, my voice unsteady. "I was thinking about breaking his hands," Dante corrected. "Kissing you seemed like a better option." "Dante." He silenced me with another kiss, softer this time, almost reverential. Like I was something sacred and forbidden and dangerous all at once. We didn't sleep together that night. He simply held me in his office chair, my back against his chest, his arms around me while the city lights sparkled below, and I tried to understand how I'd ended up here in the arms of a man I should have been terrified of, feeling safer than I'd ever felt in my life. It was then that the first threat arrived. I was at the shelter, helping a little girl named Rosa with her reading, when Dante appeared. He never appeared in daylight. He never appeared in public places where he might be seen, so his arrival was shocking enough to make the shelter director jump. "Eva," he said, and his voice was different, sharp, controlled, dangerous in a way I hadn't quite heard before. "We need to leave." "What's happened?" I asked, already standing. "Nothing yet," he said, "but something is about to. Come." He didn't touch me, but his presence was so commanding that the shelter director simply let us go without question. In the car, he explained, a rival family was making moves. They'd discovered his interest in me, and they were planning to use that interest against him. They were going to take me, leverage me, perhaps kill me just to make a point. "You can't be around me right now," Dante said, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "It's too dangerous. I'm moving you." "Where?" I asked. "Somewhere secure. A property I own upstate. You'll have protection, security, everything you need." "I have a life," I protested weakly. "I have a job. I have my father. Your father is being handled," Dante said flatly. "He's been told you needed to leave the city suddenly for a personal matter. He'll accept this because he understands that questioning me would be inadvisable." Rage flared in my chest, bright and hot. "You can't just take me." "I can," Dante said, his dark eyes finding mine for a moment before returning to the road. "And I am. This isn't a negotiation, Eva. This is me keeping you alive." I wanted to fight. I wanted to insist on my independence, my right to choose my own fate. But the truth was deeper than that. I didn't want to fight him. Part of me, the part that had been growing since the moment he entered that wedding, wanted exactly this. Wanted to be so completely under his control that the world couldn't touch me. That realization frightened me more than his rivals ever could. The safe house was a sprawling estate tucked into mountains where the trees grew thick and the silence was complete. He'd staffed it with security, with servants who asked no questions, with everything designed to keep me comfortable and contained. "How long?" I asked as he showed me to the master bedroom, which was the size of my entire apartment. "Until I've handled the threat," he said. "And if you can't?" He didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Then you're safer here than you'd be anywhere else," he said. If something happens to me, there are instructions, safe houses, money, documents. You'll be taken care of. Don't. I started, but he held up a hand. Not a death wish, he said, just realism. This life comes with risks. I'd be a fool to pretend it doesn't, and I've never been a fool about the things that matter. He moved to leave, and instinctively I reached out and caught his wrist. Don't go, I whispered. His expression softened, and for a moment I saw that vulnerable man from the library, the one who'd read Russian literature as a child and remembered his mother's voice. I have to, he said, turning his hand to catch mine, but I'll be careful. Promise? I promise, he said. And something about the way he said it made me believe that if Dante Moretti made a promise, he would move heaven and earth to keep it. He stayed for one more night, and we simply slept, my body curled against his arm around me, his chin resting on top of my head. There was no desire in it, just the simple animal comfort of proximity to someone you trusted with your life. In the morning, he was gone. I didn't hear from him for 4 days. The security team wouldn't tell me anything, just that everything was being handled, that I should remain patient, that there was no cause for concern. But concern was all I had. It filled the hours between sunup and sundown. It made me pace the halls of that sprawling house. It kept me awake at night, listening for sounds of violence. On the 5th day, he came back. There was blood on his shirt, not his. I could tell from the way he moved, the absence of pain in his dark eyes. He showered while I waited in the bedroom, and when he emerged, he was clean and whole and just as dangerous as the day I'd met him. It's handled, he said simply. I didn't ask what he'd done. I didn't want to know. But I looked at him standing in the doorway, backlit by the light from the bathroom, and I understood that he'd killed for me, that he would kill again, would kill anyone, would burn the world down if it threatened me. And instead of being horrified, I felt safe. Come here, I said. He did, moving to the bed where I sat, kneeling in front of me so our eyes were level. I reached up and touched his face, my fingers tracing his cheekbone, his jaw, the line of his mouth. He held absolutely still, like he was afraid that any movement would shatter this moment. Thank you, I whispered. For what? For keeping me safe. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in his control, a moment of raw emotion that he usually kept locked behind walls of stone. You shouldn't thank me for that, he said. That's the one thing I'll always do. That's not a choice or a sacrifice. That's just what I am now. What? I asked. Yours, he said, and the word carried so much weight that I felt it settle into my bones. I kissed him then, leaning forward and pressing my mouth to his. His hands came up to cup my face, and he kissed me back with a hunger that made my body respond in ways I didn't have names for. My heart raced, my skin flushed. Something deep inside me ached toward him like a plant reaching for sunlight. When he pulled back, his breathing was rough. Not yet, he said, his voice strained. I want to, but not like this. Not while you're scared and I'm angry, and neither of us is thinking clearly. It was the most restraint I'd ever heard in his voice, and it moved me in a way I couldn't articulate. The days blurred together in that house in the mountains. Without the structure of work or the city around me, time became something malleable. We fell into a rhythm mornings where Dante reviewed business on encrypted video calls while I read in the library. Afternoons where we walked through the extensive grounds with security maintaining a discreet distance. Evenings where we talked, really talked, in a way that felt more intimate than any physical contact. I learned that his father had been a violent man, that Dante had taken over the family business at 16, that he'd learned early that showing weakness meant death. I learned that he read extensively but pretended not to, that he had a specific preference for coffee prepared in a particular way, that he couldn't sleep more than a few hours without his body tensing up, ready for threats. He learned that I'd always been afraid of disappointing people, that I volunteered at the shelter because I saw pieces of myself in those children scared, uncertain, trying to be brave. He learned that I cried at sad movies and that I talked in my sleep. He learned the small things that composed me. On the 7th night of forced proximity, we sat on the terrace overlooking the forested mountains. a bottle of wine between us and the stars above seeming impossibly close. I have to go back to the city in 2 days, Dante said. My chest tightened. For how long? A week, maybe longer. There are business issues that require my attention. I'll come with you, I said immediately. Not yet, Dante replied. The situation isn't completely secure. Give me another week to make certain, and then I'll bring you back. I don't want to stay here alone, I said, and the vulnerability in my voice surprised me. I'd never been good at admitting when I needed something. Dante set down his wine glass and reached over, taking my hand. His fingers were warm, his grip gentle. You won't be alone, he said. I'll be one phone call away. And you have the entire estate, the library, security. You can't leave, but within those boundaries, you can do anything you want. That's not the same, I said. No, he agreed. It's not. We sat in silence for a long moment. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and growing things. Inside the house, a clock chimed the hour. Tell me something true, Dante said finally. Something you've never told anyone else. I considered it. I'm afraid I'm becoming someone I don't recognize, I said slowly. I'm afraid that this life your life is going to change me so completely that by the time I realize what I've done, I won't be able to go back. You won't be able to go back, Dante confirmed, and there was no apology in his voice. But that's not something to fear, Eva. That's something to accept. You're not becoming someone new. You're becoming someone you always were. Someone deeper. Someone braver. Someone capable of handling the weight of this world. What if I don't want to be? I asked. You do, he said simply. You've wanted it since the wedding. You just didn't know what it looked like. I turned to face him, and in the darkness his features were sharp and severe. Tell me something true, I said. Something you've never told anyone else. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I was afraid I'd never feel anything again, he said. I became the predator so completely that I thought I'd excised the capacity to be anything else. And then you looked at me across a ballroom, and it was like someone turned on a light in a room I thought had been empty for years. That's not fair, I said. What's not fair? That you get to say things like that you get to make declarations and expect me to match your intensity. I'm not built that way. I'm not. I stumbled over the words. Dante released my hand and stood, moving to the edge of the terrace. You think I'm stronger than you, he said. But you're wrong. You're the stronger one. I'm just willing to break things to get what I want. You're willing to break yourself. That's infinitely more brave. I don't want to break myself, I said quietly. I know, he said, turning back to me. But the world breaks people, Eva. At least if you're with me, you're broken by someone who will spend the rest of his life putting you back together. It wasn't a romantic thing to say. It was terrible and dark and possessive in the worst way. But it was also true in a way that I couldn't argue with. I want you to touch me, I said suddenly, the words falling out before I could stop them. Dante's entire body went still. Eva, not like that, I said quickly, my face flushing. I mean, yes, like that eventually, but I mean now. I want you to just hold me, like you're making sure I don't disappear. He was back at my chair in 2 strides, pulling me to my feet and into his arms. My face ended up pressed against his chest, and I could feel his heartbeat through layers of expensive fabric. He wrapped his arms around me, one hand on the back of my head, and just held me there while the night deepened around us. I'm terrified, I whispered into the darkness. I know. I don't even know if I like you. I might just be trapped in some Stockholm Syndrome situation where you like me, Dante said. And there was certainty in his voice that didn't leave room for doubt. You like me because I don't pretend to be anything I'm not. You like me because I see you completely and I still want you. You like me because I scare you and you're tired of being safe. I pulled back enough to look up at him. How did you become so sure of everything? I'm not, he said, and his eyes were soft. I'm terrified too, but I'm better at hiding it. He held me like that until the night grew too cold and we went back inside, to the room with the enormous bed where we lay down fully clothed, his body behind mine, his arm around me, and slept like people who'd finally found harbor. 2 days became 3, became a week, and Dante couldn't leave. There were phone calls that made his expression darken. Visitors who came to the house for encrypted meetings in the study, arguments I could hear through closed doors, his voice low and cutting. Other men backing down from whatever stand they were trying to take. On the 8th day, I found him on the terrace at 3 in the morning, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, his face turned toward the darkness. "Come back to bed," I said. "In a moment," he replied, not looking at me. I sat down anyway, pulling my robe closer around me. The night was cold, our breath visible in the darkness. "Talk to me," I said. "There's a complication," Dante said finally. "A betrayal I didn't anticipate. Someone I trusted is selling information to one of my rivals." "Who?" "Someone close to me. Family, actually, though blood doesn't mean much in this world." He turned to look at me and his eyes were bleak. "I have to make a decision about how to handle this, and every option available to me involves violence. It's inevitable. It's necessary, but it will complicate things." "What kind of complications?" I asked. "The kind that might require us to leave," he said. "To disappear to somewhere they can't find us. To rebuild from nothing." I tried to process this. "We could do that?" "Yes," he said. "I have resources scattered across the world. We could be in South America by tomorrow, building a new life. Without your family, without your business, without everything," Dante confirmed. "If that's what it took to keep you safe." The weight of that statement settled over me like snow. He would burn his entire empire, sever every connection, start from nothing, just to keep me alive. The knowledge should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like love. "I don't want you to give everything up," I said. "Then tell me what you want," Dante said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Because I'm standing at a crossroads, and I need to know which direction you're pointing me in." I moved closer to him, close enough that I could take the whiskey glass from his unresisting hand and set it aside, close enough that I could touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the stubble that had grown during days without sleep. "I want you to be honest with me," I said. "About all of it. What you're going to do about this person who betrayed you, what the consequences will be, what kind of danger we'll be in. And then I want you to know that I'm choosing to stay anyway." "Eva, don't," I said. "Don't try to protect me from this. Don't try to make it smaller or less real. I know what you are. I've always known. What I'm trying to tell you is that I'm choosing it. I'm choosing you, not despite the danger, but with full knowledge of it." He caught my hand against his face, pressing my palm to his cheek. "You're going to regret that." "Probably," I agreed, "but at least it will be my choice." "The man who betrayed me is my younger brother," Dante said, and the pain in his voice was so raw that it made my heart twist. "I raised him. My father died when he was 10, and I became his father, his brother, his everything. And he sold us to the Moreno family for money and the promise of power." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to handle it," Dante said, in a way that sends a message to everyone else who might be thinking about betrayal. "I'm going to make sure he understands that there are consequences for breaking my trust." "Are you going to kill him?" I asked quietly. Dante's silence was answer enough. I should have felt horror. I should have pulled away in disgust. Instead, I felt something crack open inside me, the last piece of resistance, the last barrier between who I'd been and who I was becoming. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. I understand," I said. "You do what needs to be done. You make the hard choice because someone has to. And I'm here. Whatever comes after, I'm here." He pulled me against him, his hand at the back of my head, holding me like I was the only solid thing in a crumbling world. "I don't deserve you," he said into my hair. "No," I agreed. "But I'm giving myself to you anyway." We went back to bed, and for the first time, he let me feel the full weight of his fear. His body was tense, his sleep fractured. I held him through it, my fingers tracing patterns on his chest, my presence a promise that he wasn't alone in whatever came next. In the morning, he made calls. Arrangement made. By afternoon, he knew exactly what needed to happen, and the decision hardened in his eyes like steel being forged in fire. That night, he didn't come to bed. I found him in the library, surrounded by files and photographs. Among them was a picture of a younger man who had Dante's dark eyes, and something of his face before life had marked it with violence and betrayal. He leaves for Rome tomorrow, Dante said without looking up. Old family business, or so he thinks. In reality, he's meeting with the Moronos to finalize the sale of my operations in Eastern Europe. What will you do? I asked. Intercept him, Dante said. Take back everything he sold. Make sure he understands that this kind of betrayal has a price. And then? And then I decide if my brother lives or dies, Dante said flatly. That depends on whether I can forgive the betrayal. I haven't decided yet. I sat down across from him. What would your mother say? His head jerked up, his eyes suddenly fierce. Don't. You told me she read Russian literature to you. You told me she was kind before your father changed her. What would she say about killing your brother? She would say that she raised a monster, Dante said coldly. And she would be right. Or, I said carefully, she would say that you have a choice, and that you're strong enough to make the difficult one instead of the easy one. Forgiveness isn't easy, Dante said. No, I agreed, but neither is becoming exactly the thing your enemies expect you to be. You can kill him, and everyone will understand why, and you'll move forward exactly as you've always moved forward. Or you can find another way, something that punishes without destroying. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the war happening inside him between the predator and the man, between blood and humanity, between the easy path and the right one. He'll betray me again, Dante said. Maybe, I said. But I don't think so. I think once he understands that you could kill him and chose not to, that mercy will break him more than violence ever could. Dante stood abruptly and moved to the window, looking out at the dark forest beyond. You're asking me to be better than I am. No, I said, standing as well. I'm asking you to be everything you already are. He turned back to me, and when he did, I saw that crack in his armor, that vulnerability that made him human instead of a monster. I moved toward him and took his face in my hands, tilting his head down toward mine. You're not a monster, I whispered. You're just a man who's had to be hard to survive. And I see you. All of you. The violence and the kindness. The cruelty and the capacity for mercy. And I choose you anyway. He kissed me then, and it was different from all the other kisses. It was raw and desperate and filled with something that tasted like salvation. Like the possibility of becoming something more than the sum of his worst choices. He didn't leave for Rome that night. Instead, we stayed in the library, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, about his mother, about the exact moment he'd understood that love was a liability in his world. I told him about the things I'd been afraid of, the dreams I'd abandoned because they seemed impractical. The person I'd been trying to become before he'd showed me that I could be someone entirely different. By the time the sun rose, we'd exhausted ourselves talking, and we moved to the bedroom in a kind of trance. He stopped at the foot of the bed, suddenly uncertain in a way I'd never seen him be. I won't hurt you, he said, though whether he was reassuring me or himself, I couldn't tell. I know, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my limbs. I reached out and took his hand, pulling him toward me. He came like he was being pulled out of water, his movements careful and deliberate. I was so nervous I could barely breathe, but there was no fear in it, just the vulnerability of being seen completely by someone who'd penetrated every other barrier I possessed. Show me, I said. He kissed me gently at first, his hands barely touching my face. The kiss deepened slowly, and I felt myself opening to him, my body relaxing into the possibility of this. His hands moved to my hair, threading through the strands, and the tenderness of it made something inside me break open. I reached for him, my hands finding the buttons of his shirt. They came undone one by one, revealing the landscape of his body muscular and scarred, bearing the marks of a life lived in violence. I traced some of those scars with my fingers and he held still, letting me map him. "I'm scared," I whispered. "I know," he said, and his voice was so gentle that it broke my heart. "I'll be careful." He undressed me slowly, reverently, like I was something sacred. Each piece of clothing that fell away made me feel more exposed, but also more safe, because his eyes never left mine, and they were full of something that looked like worship. "You're beautiful," he said, and meant it. I'd never felt beautiful before. I felt it now. He took his time, kissing my collarbone, my shoulder, my forearm. His mouth was soft and his touch was controlled, everything about him showing restraint. When he finally positioned himself above me, I was ready. My body understood what was about to happen and welcomed it. "Look at me," he said, and I did, my eyes meeting his in the morning light that filtered through the windows. The first moment of him entering me was complicated stretching, foreign, uncomfortable. I made a sound and his body went rigid. "Breathe," he said against my neck. I did, and as I did, the discomfort transformed into something else, something deeper. My body adjusted, welcomed him, and I felt a connection that went beyond the physical. It was as though something fundamental in me recognized, something fundamental in him, and they fit together like two pieces of a puzzle that had been separated forever. He moved, slowly, carefully, his breathing ragged against my ear. He whispered things in the language of violence, and love promises and prayers, vows and threats. I clung to him, my nails digging into his shoulders, my body responding to his in ways I didn't have names for. The feelings built inside me, not just physical but emotional. A sense of being completely consumed, completely known, completely owned by this man who'd stalked me and possessed me, and somehow made it all feel like love. "I've got you," he said. "I've always got you." And I believed him. When it ended, we stayed tangled together, his body still covering mine, his breathing slowly steadying against my neck. I felt completely shattered and completely whole at the exact same time. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough. I couldn't speak, so I nodded, my eyes closing. He rolled to the side but kept his arm around me, holding me against him, his chin resting on top of my head. I started, but I had no words. "I know," he said. "We slept like that." His body curved around mine, his arms around me, and when I woke, the afternoon was halfway through and I felt like a completely different person. Everything was different now. Everything had changed. He was gone from the bed, but I could hear the shower running in the bathroom. I lay there for a moment, taking stock of myself tender in places I'd never been tender before but not hurt. Somehow he'd managed to break me open without breaking me in the process. When he emerged, he was fully dressed, his hair damp, his expression soft in a way I'd only seen in moments when he thought no one was looking. "I have to go," he said simply. "To Rome, to take care of my brother." "Okay," I said, and I meant it. "Will you be here when I come back?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be here." He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled me up, kissing my forehead, my nose, my mouth with exquisite gentleness. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For breaking me open, for reminding me that I'm capable of more than I thought." He pulled back, and his dark eyes were serious. "I'm going to make the choice you suggested. I'm going to handle this with mercy instead of murder. And when I come back, we're going to figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" I asked. "A life," he said simply. "One you never expected but might actually want." He left an hour later, and I was left alone in that sprawling house with security and silence and the knowledge that I'd given something to him that I could never take back. He came back 3 days later with blood on his hands. Not his own. I could tell from the way he moved, but it made my stomach twist regardless. I'd read the news reports, a confrontation in Rome between rival families, casualties on one side, a power shift in the European operations. His brother had survived, but barely, and had subsequently disappeared from view. Mercy that came with a price. It's done. Dante said, washing his hands at the sink in the master bathroom while I sat on the counter watching him. Are you okay? I asked. Yes, he said, which I didn't believe, but I understood that there were things he wasn't ready to talk about, and I didn't push. He pulled me into his arms still damp from the shower, and we stayed like that until his body stopped trembling with whatever adrenaline and violence was working through his system. 2 days of normalcy followed, walking through the grounds, reading in the library, cooking together in the kitchen. Him teaching me how to make pasta from scratch like his mother had taught him. We fell into a rhythm that felt almost domestic, almost safe. Then the night everything changed. It started with the explosion. The entire east wing of the house suddenly erupted in flames, the force of it throwing me out of bed and onto the floor. Dante was moving before I even registered what had happened, pulling me up and into a protective embrace, his hand on the back of my head as another explosion rocked the structure. Moreno, he said with absolute certainty. They found us. Alarms blared throughout the house. Security rushed through the halls. Dante moved me to an interior closet and positioned me behind a reinforced wall panel. Stay here, he commanded. Don't come out for anything. Don't make a sound. Dante, trust me, he said, and his eyes were completely black, all gentleness erased. I will come back for you. He was gone before I could respond, and I was alone in absolute darkness, listening to the sounds of violence outside my small hiding place. Gunfire, shouting, the terrible crash of the house burning. I don't know how long I was in there. Time became meaningless. All I could do was sit with my arms wrapped around my knees and pray that he was alive, that he would come back, that the gamble of loving him wouldn't end like this. The panel opened violently and I screamed before I recognized him. Dante was covered in soot and blood, a gun in his hand, his shirt torn. We have to go, he said, pulling me out and into his arms. Now. He moved me through the burning house with such single-minded purpose that I didn't have time to be afraid. We were in the garage, in a car, speeding down a mountain road with the house behind us consumed in flames. What happened? I managed to ask. An attack, he said, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Moreno sent a team to kill me and anyone I care about. They succeeded in burning the house, but they didn't account for the security system. His jaw clenched. Most of them didn't make it out? The security team. Dead, he said flatly. All of them, men I've known for years. I wanted to comfort him, but I understood that there was no comfort for this. There was only understanding that in his world, bodies piled up, and you either grieved or you kept moving. We kept moving. We drove through the night, and Dante made calls on an encrypted phone, giving orders, reorganizing operations, ensuring that the Moreno family understood the cost of what they'd attempted. By dawn, we were in a different safe house, smaller, less opulent, but equally secure. I'm sorry, I said. Dante looked at me like I'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. For what? For being the reason they came. If I wasn't, no, he said sharply, cutting me off. Don't. You don't apologize for being loved. You don't apologize for my choice to make you valuable enough to protect. That's on me. All of this is on me. But he kissed me like I was the reason he was still alive, like the explosion and the violence and the death were prices worth paying for the privilege of touching me. Over the next few days, I watched him wage war from a distance. Calls came in constantly. Operations were launched. Enemies were dealt with. The Moreno family found themselves isolated, their allies abandoning them, their supply chains cut off. It was elegant and brutal in equal measure, a complete dismantling of their power base without Dante ever leaving the safe house. On the 4th day, he sat across from me and told me the truth. They're going to keep coming, he said. As long as we're connected, you're in danger. There's only one way to end this. What? I asked, though I thought I knew. We disappear, he said, completely. New identities, new locations, new lives. We can't be Dante and Eva anymore. We have to become someone else. Okay, I said. He looked shocked. Okay? Yes, I said. I meant what I said before. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. If that means disappearing, then we disappear. You're giving up everything, he said. So are you, I replied. So we're even. He pulled me across the table and kissed me, and it tasted like gratitude and surrender and the beginning of something new. The paperwork was extensive. New identities, created by experts who'd been doing this for decades. Eva became Claire, an art consultant from Barcelona. Dante became Marco, an import/export businessman with interests in South American operations. We were given histories that were vague enough to be believable but detailed enough to survive scrutiny. On the night before we left, I made a phone call I knew would be the last one for years. My father answered on the third ring, concern immediately evident in his voice. Eva, where are you? I can't tell you that, I said, and I could hear him exhale heavily at the other end of the line. He knew. On some level, I think he'd always known where this was going. Are you safe? He asked. Yes, completely safe. Are you choosing to do this? I am, I said, and I meant it completely. I love him, Dad. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true, and I'm making the choice to be with him. There was a long silence. Then, I wish you would have chosen differently, but I understand. His voice cracked slightly. If you need anything, I can't come back, I said. You know that. This is goodbye. I know, he said, but you're my daughter, and I love you. That doesn't change. Because you're running from the world with a man I probably shouldn't know anything about. I cried then, sitting alone in a dark room, understanding that this was the price of choosing Dante, the loss of my father, my friends, my entire life before. But I also understood that it was a price I was willing to pay. I love you too, I whispered. We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone, knowing I would never use it again. Dante found me on the balcony after, looking out at the city that I'd left behind. He didn't say anything, just wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and stood beside me in silence. Thank you for understanding, I said. I would have made sure you said goodbye, he replied, even if it was hard, even though it increases the risk. Because you deserve that. You deserve to know that your father loves you, that leaving him was a choice, not something I made you do. That's not what you would have done a year ago, I said. No, he agreed. A year ago, I would have removed the decision from you entirely, decided for you that he was a liability, and cut him off. A year ago, I was different. What changed? I asked, even though I knew the answer. You, he said simply. Loving you changed me. We left the next morning. The car took us to an airport where a private plane was waiting. Inside, we became our new selves, new passports, new documents, new lives. As we took off, I watched the city disappear beneath the clouds and felt an unexpected sense of peace. I was terrified of what came next, uncertain about who I was becoming, frightened by how completely I'd surrendered to this man and his world. But I was also more alive than I'd ever been. What are you thinking? Dante asked from across the small cabin. That I made the right choice, I said. That whatever comes next, this is right. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. There will be hard days, he said. There will be times when you regret this, when you wish you'd chosen differently, when the weight of what we've done becomes unbearable. Probably, I agreed, but I'm going to spend every single day making sure that you know you made the right choice, he continued. I'm going to protect you, provide for you, love you in ways that make you question why you ever doubted this was right. Is that a promise? I asked. Yes, he said. It's a promise. The plane climbed higher, carrying us toward a future that was completely uncertain but somehow felt inevitable. We settled in Buenos Aires. The apartment overlooked the city, situated on the 35th floor of a building that required multiple security clearances to access. Dante's money preceded us, already invested in legitimate businesses, already woven into the fabric of the city's economy. By the time we arrived, Marco and Claire were already established members of the community. The first month was strange. We were building a life from nothing, creating memories in a place that had no history of us. But we were also safer than we'd been in months. The immediate threats had been dealt with. The Morno family had been dismantled. A new balance of power had been established in the criminal underworld that kept other families from making the mistake of coming after Dante. I became an art consultant in truth, not just in name. I worked with galleries and collectors, developing expertise that I'd never imagined I'd have. Dante expanded his legitimate businesses, but I knew he was still maintaining operations in the shadows, moving money, managing networks, keeping his fingers on the pulse of the world he'd left but never truly abandoned. 6 months into our new life, he proposed without an engagement ring. We were at an art museum looking at a Caravaggio when he simply said, "Marry me." "I thought we were already married," I replied. "In every way that matters." "We are," he agreed. "But I want it legal. I want your name changed to something that ties you to me permanently. I want the world to know that you belong to me, and more importantly, that I belong to you." I turned to look at him, and despite the new face he was wearing, his hair dyed a different shade, his features altered by subtle cosmetic procedures that made him almost unrecognizable to anyone who'd known him before. I could see all the versions of him: the predator, the man who loved Russian literature, the one who'd broken into a wedding and claimed me before he even knew my name. "Yes," I said. "We got married in a small ceremony in the city registry office, with 2 witnesses we'd never met before, signing the papers." Dante slipped a band of white gold onto my finger, and I did the same for him. "To the darkness and the light," he said as we left the building. "To all the contradictions that make us real. To survival," I added, "to choosing each other anyway." On our wedding night, he made love to me with the same reverence he'd shown that first time in the mountains, but with more confidence, more knowledge of exactly how to make my body respond. Afterward, he told me things he'd never shared before about his mother, about the moment he understood he was going to have to be the predator or the prey, about the loneliness of that choice and how it had shaped him into something barely human. "I don't feel alone anymore," he said, his fingers threading through my hair. "Good," I replied. "You never have to again." But paradise, I was learning, always came with a price. 2 months after our wedding, Dante received a visitor. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I overheard the phone call. His brother was alive and had reached out. They met once, in a neutral location, and when Dante came home, there was something changed in his expression. "He's building a case against me," Dante told me without preamble. "For the authorities. He's cooperating with federal investigators. It's not enough to bring me down. I've been too careful for that. But it's enough to make things complicated." I'd known this life came with consequences, but hearing it stated so plainly made them feel real in a new way. "What will you do?" I asked. "Nothing," Dante said simply. "I could have him killed, but that's not who I'm trying to be anymore. Instead, I'm going to let him try, and when the time comes, I'll have the best lawyers money can buy, and I'll beat him in court." "Will you?" I asked. "Probably not," he admitted. "There's a good chance they'll find something that sticks, that I'll end up in prison, that our life here will collapse. But that's the price of trying to be better. That's what it costs to choose mercy over violence." I moved closer to him and took his face in my hands. "Then we'll handle it together," I said. "When it comes. If it comes. You could leave," he said, "before everything falls apart. You could build a normal life somewhere safe." "No, I couldn't," I replied. "Not because you won't let me, but because I don't want to. The danger remains. It always will. Federal investigations are ongoing. The threat of exposure hangs over us like a sword. I live knowing that any day could be the day when the world we've built comes crashing down, when Dante is taken from me, when the consequences of his past finally catch up to both of us. But I also live knowing that I'm not alone in facing it. He chose me when I was naive and innocent and terrified, and I chose him when he was dangerous and complicated and scarred by violence. We chose each other, and that choice made with full knowledge of the consequences is the most real thing I've ever done. Some nights, I wake up in our apartment above the city and listen to him sleeping, and I wonder how this happened, how I went from a girl who'd been afraid of disappointing people to a woman who'd burned her entire life down for love. But mostly, I don't wonder. Mostly, I just lie there in the darkness and feel grateful that he found me across a ballroom. Grateful that jealousy made him act. Grateful that when he learned the truth that I was at that wedding with no ulterior motive, no deception. Just a girl in a blush-colored dress, he didn't let me go. Grateful that I had the courage to choose him anyway. The future is uncertain. The danger is real. But so is the love, and in the end, I think that's all that matters.